More rights. More rights. Hello, Black Knight Scholars. This is Mr. Deegan. I'm holding this protest sign up because the Industrial Revolution leads to change brought on by protests and labor strikes. Women and children fight for more rights, and slavery ends. We're on to Unit 6, Lesson 3. Please take out your VidNotes packets and turn to page 6. We'll be working from page 6 and page 7 today, and we're going to be studying the social effects of the Industrial Revolution. Social effects, meaning the impact the Industrial Revolution had on people, specifically women who are working in the factories, children who are also working in the factories, and we're also going to talk about the institution of slavery. How is slavery impacted by the Industrial Revolution? Let's find out. First, a guiding question. How did the Industrial Revolution impact the lives of women, children, and the family? Agricultural economies were based on the family unit, and the Industrial Revolution had a significant impact on the structure and the function of the family. Women were working for the first time. Women were voting for the first time, and men had to switch the roles that they played. The Industrial Revolution placed new demands on the labor of men, women, and children, and workers organized labor unions to fight for the improved working conditions and workers' rights. So from the farm to the factory, and once workers arrive at the factory, they want to be treated like human beings, not like robots. So labor unions and strikes are a result. What was work like in the factory system? As we learned previously, the family-based cottage industries were displaced by the factory system. No more working at home. You had to work in cities, in these crowded, dirty, unsafe factories. And as I said, there are harsh working conditions within these factories, and men are competing with women and children for wages. Why did factory bosses allow kindergartners to work in factories? There were no child labor laws, so you could be 5 or 6 or 7 years old and work in these factories. So why hire a child? Child labor kept the costs of production low and profits high. If you're a factory boss, you see dollar signs in your head. You don't see the face of this child who is suffering because of your machines. Owners of mines and factories had considerable control over the lives of their laborers. If you were parents and you had a job in the factory, you would not want to complain because you would lose your job. And you see a factory boss in this political cartoon who is controlling these children, and it says child labor exploiter. To exploit means to take advantage of, and the factory bosses and the bosses who controlled the mines were exploiting children and their parents in order to win a profit. What happened when women and children entered the labor force during the Industrial Revolution? Well, number one, you have the expansion of public education. The children worked in factories, but for a small portion of the day, they met to go to school. And you see a picture of a school within a factory during the Industrial Revolution here. Also, women increased their demands for suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote. Women are earning a paycheck, they're going off to work, and pretty soon they feel like they have more power than ever before. And they want the power to vote and decide who represents them in their community or city or state or country. Women's suffrage is a result of the Industrial Revolution. Also, women have a mixed blessing here in the Industrial Revolution. The good part of the Industrial Revolution was that factory work provided higher wages than work done at home. The bad side of the Industrial Revolution for women was that women earned roughly 1/3 of the wages earned by men. Yes, that's right, there was sexism involved. So women begin working hard for the abolition, the end of slavery. What happened when women and children entered the labor force? Well, number 3, the introduction of reforms to end child labor and to end the suffering of children like this. Let's go through this timeline to learn more. In 1836, the state of Massachusetts passes the first child labor law. Children under 15 working in factories must attend school for 3 months a year. So children are slowly earning more rights. 6 years later, Massachusetts limits the children's work days to 10 hours a day, which is still a lot. 1886, one of the largest unions in the world, the American Federation of Labor, proposes a ban on all labor for children under 14. So children are slowly being more protected and more protected. And in 1904, the National Child Labor Committee forms to aggressively seek reform to national child labor laws. And 20 years later, Congress passes a constitutional amendment banning child labor, and it did not gain enough votes by the states. And that legislation fails. Imagine that. Why would you not want to protect children? So in 1938, Congress has enough political will to pass this act that regulates a minimum age and hour of children in the workforce. So it took a long time, but children finally gain rights and protection in the labor force in the United States. The group that introduced reforms to end child labor and to fight for women's rights was labor unions. Labor unions are very important during the Industrial Revolution. Let's learn more about them. What is a labor union? It's a group of employees who negotiate with employers for improved working conditions and wages, higher pay. Why did workers organize into labor unions during the Industrial Revolution? Well, they encouraged strikes, labor strikes, to demand increased wages and improved working conditions. They also lobbied for, meaning fought for, laws to improve the lives of workers, including women and children especially. And lastly, labor unions wanted collective bargaining between laborers and management, the bosses who paid the salaries and set the conditions. Collective bargaining was a way to negotiate. And further defining collective bargaining, negotiations between those who support laborers and those who support bosses and factory managers. Why did the Industrial Revolution affect slavery? How was slavery affected by this period of history? Let's walk through how slavery ends as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So we think back to our previous lesson. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin in 1793. The effect is that cotton is easier and quicker to produce, and there's a huge increase in the amount of cotton being produced, and the US sees the effects of that. The American South becomes more dependent on cotton as a cash crop, so the American South becomes more dependent on slavery. Then you have northern abolition groups, groups that fight against slavery, including many women. And southern groups refuse to give up their slaves because giving up their slaves means they lose money. Then you have the American Civil War, in which slavery is eventually outlawed in the United States. So cotton eventually leads to the Civil War and the outlawing of slavery. It's a long process for that to happen. And first, slavery increased during the Industrial Revolution, as I said, because the cotton gin increased demand for slave labor on American plantations. Eventually, slavery ended. The US in 1865 and Britain in 1833 outlawed first the slave trade and then eventually slavery itself. And you see these young women who are wearing protest slogans, abolish slavery. The women's rights movement and the movement to end slavery were very much connected. That is all, ladies and gentlemen. Please fill out your summary questions first. And when you're done with the summary questions, a preview for next lesson. Two men, two different economic theories. This man is Adam Smith. He is an economic theorist who believes in capitalism. This is Karl Marx. He is an economic theorist who believes in communism. We are going to compare and contrast capitalism and communism next lesson. Until that time, this is Mr. Deegan signing off.